You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. One of the biggest challenges in tech transfer isn't generating innovation. It's helping promising technologies move forward from early success into sustained real-world use. That challenge shows up in a lot of fields, and today we're going to explore it through one fast-moving example, AI in healthcare. Our guest today is Adam Brickman, a healthcare innovation leader and part of a team behind Vega Health, a new company focused on helping organizations identify, implement, and scale validated AI solutions. Vega Health was launched to address a pattern that's becoming increasingly common across industries. Technologies that show early promise, sometimes even strong results, can still struggle to move beyond where they were first developed. While Vega's work is grounded in healthcare, the lessons around adoption, validation, and scale are relevant well beyond that space. Adam, welcome to the podcast. So excited to have you here on the air.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here.
So, Adam, I thought the best way to kick the podcast off today is I know you work at the point where new technologies meet real-world constraints. When you look at AI in healthcare today, what feels exciting and what feels genuinely hard?
Thanks so much for asking, Lisa. So, what's exciting from my perspective is just the opportunity. There are so many effective solutions being developed, having been implemented, actually already delivering real-world results at health systems, universities across the country. What's challenging is too often those innovations, they just stay siloed. They never make it past their site of origin. And that's in part what Vega Health has been founded to solve. Our belief is if it worked for Duke Health or Kaiser Permanente or University of Michigan Medicine, why shouldn't every health system in the country that could benefit from it?
So why do these things end up stuck?
Well, there are a lot of good reasons. Some good reasons, some other reasons. One reason is right now, the commercialization paths for a lot of these technologies are somewhat limited. So you sort of today have four options. You can just keep it internal. Hey, great, we made something that worked. We'll stick with it. You can publish it open source, which some have done. That's what I would say is a very noble endeavor, but often doesn't really lead to scale. You could spin out your own company, which can be very effective, but is also very intensive. Or you can exclusively license to one of these AI point solution providers. And I think what Vega Health is trying to do is add a fifth pathway. So you don't have to put all your eggs in one basket or have the inventor decide to be a CEO. And so that's one reason a lot of these things stay silent. I think the second is, even if an AI model works really effectively in one health system, it's never a drop it into a new environment and get the same results. The details, the implementation matter greatly. And that's another gap that right now it feels like a lot of the health systems that are doing these kinds of innovations aren't necessarily as equipped to solve. And that's another thing we try to solve at Vega Health as well.
How'd you come up with the idea for Vega Health?
Well, I wish I could take all the credit. I surely do. But that really sits with our CEO, Mark Sendak. And his story around this is fascinating. So he worked for over a decade at what's called the Duke Institute for Health Innovation. Best way to think of them is Duke Health's kind of internal innovation SWAT team. So for over 10 years, he and the team at DHI would help the health system leadership identify their key priorities. They would hear from clinicians and administrators what their biggest pain points were. And then their job was to develop innovations that solved those problems. He did this for about 10 years. About 3 years ago, he founded something called the Health AI Partnership. And all of that came from the conclusion of just how hard it was to scale and distribute these solutions. Duke tried to spin out a point solution company. It had some success. It hit some limitations. Health AI Partnership, they tried to defeat best practices, create a practice network, but nothing was really connecting that last mile. And so Mark founded Vega Health last year with the idea that we could license the best-in-class AI models from academic medical centers, leading health systems across the country, really across the world, and then be the partner that helps bring those solutions to those community health systems that desperately need and want them, but maybe don't have the resources to invest in their own AI innovation team.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, AI is still relatively new for many organizations, and I can see where there's a real need for Vega Health. What are some of the common assumptions people make early on about AI that don't always hold up once implementation begins?
So I'll give you two real quick. Number one is that unless you are a big academic medical center, you can't afford the best AI. And that's just wrong, especially with the pressures these community health systems are facing. The way we put it is you can't afford not to get AI that solves your problems. I think the other big thing that doesn't often hold up is that, oh, it worked there, it'll automatically work here. What we do as part of our partnership model with these health systems is we install a proprietary platform. And once that's installed, the first thing we do is go in and test the model on the retrospective patient data. Now, what we firmly believe, and we've actually told some early customers, is we're not going to tell you which AI model is going to work best in your environment, in your patient population, because we don't know. We're going to go in and test. And actually, on our marketplace, we have models that ostensibly do the same thing, right? Sepsis prediction, ED triage. And what we do when we go into a customer is we test them both. And whichever one produces the best results, that's what we'll actually implement and integrate into their system. And so I think that's the other thing that a lot of people don't think about. And to be honest, the way these health systems have been kind of forced to buy AI solutions is a little bit backwards, because you sign the contract, you install, and then you find out if it works. That's a tough thing to do for a health system that may not have those resources to spare. And so that's another thing we think is really important, is allowing those health systems to actually test what works best in their environment before we go for a full go live.
It makes so much sense. You would think it would be common sense to do it that way, but apparently the way you just described it, it is not.
It's healthcare. Common sense sometimes shows up.
Yes.
Sometimes it doesn't.
Many times it doesn't. So, Adam, as you know, many of our listeners work with technologies that show promise in controlled or early settings, like you've been talking about. What usually changes when a technology moves from working to being used day to day?
Yeah, I mean, number one is the people. I think there's an assumption too often in technology that the people will adapt. And from our perspective, the technology has to adapt to the people. So even if an AI model has been really effective, say at Duke Health, the first thing we would do, even if we're installing that exact same model at one of our customers, is sit down for days and weeks of workflow discovery. We find out how their system works, how the people in that system operate, where they've had the biggest pain points. And then we'll adapt and configure the solution to make it fit in their environment. So I think that idea of it worked over here, so we'll just drop it and it should work the exact same way is one of those fallacies that gets folks into trouble.
Absolutely. And I know you also focus on validated solutions. So I'm curious what validation means to you in practice, and how do you translate beyond healthcare?
Yeah, so we look for what we call validation in two ways. Number one is we want it to actually have been deployed in a clinical environment and been used, right? Maybe it's not flawless, but it's that translation from it worked in research, it worked on retrospective data, to actually it's live in a clinical setting and working day to day. That's what we look for in the technology's license, because we don't want it when we deploy to a customer, it being the first time it's ever live in a clinical environment. And the second way we look is, the good old way in healthcare, right? A peer-reviewed publication or a thorough preprint that tells you exactly how the model performed in that environment. The third thing I'd add too is right now, what a lot of systems want when it comes to an AI solution, and they're not getting, is transparency. So we have a standardized documentation format that anytime we license a new model, we ask the developer to fill out. It's not onerous. It's all the information they already have, but we like to have that in a consistent format. So when we're bringing a solution to a health system, they can understand where it came from, where it was trained, all the things that people want when they look at sort of the black box of AI.
Now, you've worked with both organizations adopting technology and teams trying to scale what they've built. Where do those perspectives most often miss each other?
It's a great question, Lisa. I think they most often miss each other because they don't know each other, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not malice. It's just like nobody's making those connections necessarily. Two ways this manifests from my perspective. Number one is when a health system has, say, an internal innovation team like Duke does with DHI. Those folks are focused on solving the problems that are put in front of them. Sometimes that comes from leadership saying, "Here's our priority." Sometimes it comes from clinicians saying, like, this is just what's making my life worse or more difficult to practice medicine day to day. And so those people, I won't call it tunnel vision, but they are focused on the issues that their health system is experiencing. They know in the back of their head that that is likely translatable and many others are having those problems, but it's not their focus. And then I'd say the other big thing that really is damaging in this market is a lot of healthcare AI companies launch their company, they build their product, and then they go say, I'm going to go find the largest, most prestigious academic medical center where I can deploy. It's funny, there's about 6,000 hospitals in the United States. 7% of them are academic medical centers at that very top of the market. And so what's happening right now is there's the disconnect between those folks that are building really good things and can't scale them, and then the vendors who come in and say, I'm going to focus on 7% of the hospitals in the US. And so at Vega Health, we explicitly are here to serve that other 93% and take what that 7% has developed and scale it to the other 5,600 or so community health system hospitals across the country.
Sounds like a much better business model, 93 versus 7%.
That's certainly our hypothesis. So yeah.
Definitely. So for tech transfer professionals who don't work in healthcare, what parallels do you see between AI adoption and the challenges of scaling innovation in other industries?
So I think a couple things are common. Healthcare, obviously, and for good reason, a highly regulated industry, right? Maybe the most highly regulated industry. So number one, are you used to operating in a highly regulated environment where the costs of not protecting patient data, the cost of data breaches are quite literally existential, right? I think there's a lot of parallels to finance, those kinds of things. But, healthcare is tough and there's a reason behind it. But there's so much good we can do.
Now, a lot of attention goes to the technology itself. What non-technical factors tend to have the biggest impact on whether something actually gets adopted?
So we mentioned one earlier. Are you actually listening to the people who are going to use it day to day? You would be shocked at how often that straight up doesn't happen. A decision gets made at the leadership organization of a health system, and then the technology gets pushed down to those end users. It's one of the reasons we think focusing on that workflow discovery and user interviews, it's the first step we do once a contract is signed. We get with those people in a room. We say, show us what your day looks like. What does it look like now when this pops up? What gives you alert fatigue? What are you just at this point automatically closing out because it's not that accurate? We want to know that. The other thing I will add is user interface, which historically is not something that healthcare has really been at the forefront of. But is the information presented in a way that is easily interpretable and easily actionable? Because, if you're doing something like predicting who's going to get sepsis or who needs to be triaged to an ICU bed, those are quite literally life and death decisions. And the last thing you want getting in the way of that is it becoming so onerous for the person who has to look at that information to ingest it, think about it, and act on it. And so one of the first hires we made at Vega Health is somebody who does user experience, user design, because the technology can work perfectly, but if it's not integrated into the workflow, if you haven't listened to those people since day one, and it's not easily actionable, it won't get adopted. It'll just be, another thing that a harried, busy clinician has to now deal with, and we never want to be that.
Yeah, and to your point, I could see where in an ER that situation, if it's not readily adaptable, something that could be easily translatable, it's not going to get used, especially if there's like a mass casualty event or something like that. There's just no way the ER staff is going to be able to use it.
Exactly.
Now, Adam, I know you've talked about building connective tissue across an ecosystem. What kinds of support structures tend to be missing when technologies fail to scale?
I love that you're asking this question because it's not thought about enough. So as I mentioned, our co-founder, Mark Sendak, after 7 or 8 years at DHI, decided to launch the thing called the Health AI Partnership. And his rationale for launching that actually isn't that dissimilar from the rationale that ultimately led him to found Vega Health, but it was trying to close what we call and what he coined the digital divide in healthcare, right? Right now, health systems of all sizes are getting directives from the top being like, we've got to do the AI thing. We've got to do something with AI. Maybe that person giving the directive knows a lot about AI. Maybe they don't. Maybe they know a lot about how their clinical and administrative staff works day to day. Maybe they don't. And so, I mentioned that workflow discovery stuff we do right at the beginning of any implementation. The other thing we're doing as we implement is making sure folks have the educational materials about how a solution is supposed to work, that they have technical assistance if they need it. This is a lot of stuff that Health AI Partnership sort of pioneered in the last few years, and that at Vega Health, we're just baking directly into the business model.
It's interesting you should mention about everybody wanting to do AI in a hospital setting. Do you watch The Pit at all on HBO?
I do. I haven't started season 2 yet. I'm still on season 1.
It's all over in season 2. There's a new attending physician, and that's all she's pushing is AI and the ER. And the resistance that is she's being met with is pretty interesting. But yeah, every second she's talking AI this, AI that.
So it's funny. I'll now do that. I'll do that thing where I comment on a show I haven't seen.
Exactly.
But it's not that dissimilar from some things that are happening in ERs because there's generational divides with clinicians. There is, different risk tolerances to use new technology. And so, you got to find those champions, right? Like that's where this space is heading. And, I think, thank God, hopefully we can make some progress on some of these intractable problems. The question is, can you set up that champion to succeed and get buy-in from the other folks, or else they become the annoying colleagues who's like, well, have you tried AI? What about the AI? And again, these people are so busy. They're dealing with decisions of life and death, and they are, on their feet running around for, 12-hour shifts. The second you say, hey, there's a new thing you have to learn, there is rightful resistance. And I will be honest, the history of technology in healthcare over the last 25, 30, go back as long as you want, a lot of it has been overpromise and underdeliver. So there is this well-founded skepticism. And it's funny because one of our early customers, we were doing an administrative use case around prior authorization and revenue cycle management. And even before we closed the sale, we started meeting with some of the folks who work this in this health system. And this health system in particular had tried to deploy an AI vendor to do this. It had gone very poorly. And so this woman got on the phone and I could just tell from her body language and she was like, I'll do another AI thing over my dead body. But I think what ultimately shifted her perspective was us turning to her and saying, no. The first thing we're going to do is come to your office and I want to see how you work today. I don't think the previous AI vendor, I don't think a lot of technology vendors, are necessarily having that level of conversation. It is, let's make the sale and then move on to the next sale. We know, and we are investing heavily in those implementation and support services because we know that's the only way this stuff succeeds. Is if you have the right champions, you equip those champions to make a compelling case, and then you are working collaboratively to make sure that the technology works for them, not the other way around.
So do you think that's really what makes these innovations easier to be adopted down the line is going in, like you said, and seeing how these people are actually working and then getting these champions to champion the product later once it is fully developed?
I think it's an essential step. I don't think you can succeed without it. Now, I think there's a lot of other things you need to do. For instance, part of the services we provide once we install a solution are evaluation and monitoring, right? Now, most AI vendors do some level of that, but where they typically stop is the solution technically performing as it should? Is the model not drifting? Are the outputs consistent and accurate? We actually add 3 more layers of evaluation and monitoring. So we obviously got to check that the solution is working as intended technically. Second thing we check is user adoption. of the eligible users at that health system, how many are actually using it day to day? How many times are they overriding alerts because the alerts aren't accurate or they're not relevant? And then two other things that we are really proud of what we're investing in is we're actually tracking, is the solution delivering the clinical outcome it's supposed to be? You would, again, the absence of common sense in healthcare, you'd be shocked how rare that is, right?
Wow, that's disturbing. That is really disturbing when you think about it.
It's like, oh, we've installed the thing. I'm sure it's working. No.
And a lot of money was exchanged.
Exactly. And, so number one, is it actually contributing to the clinical or administrative outcome it was supposed to? And can we make that tie directly? And then thirdly, is it delivering return on investment? Like, we want to show these health systems where it's appropriate. And that fourth dimension is easier to measure in some cases. But if your health system has paid Vega Health to bring a solution to market, we're going to be transparent with you about whether it's delivering those outcomes and whether you're getting a return on investment where we can measure it.
Well, given all your experience, Adam, what signals suggest that a technology or a team is ready to move beyond its original environment and adapt and start to use some of these AI tools?
I'll tell you what we are looking for right now. And this is hopefully quite relevant to your listeners. So I will just put in a plug that if you are a technology manager or a tech transfer office listening to this podcast, here's what we're looking for at Vega Health. Number one, we want it to have been deployed in a clinical environment. A lot of these start as research projects, as they should. Some have been deployed retrospectively. We want to see stuff that's actually been deployed in live clinical settings on prospective data. Two, right now, we are looking for solutions that pull their model inputs from the electronic health record, the EHR. So structured or unstructured data, but that's that main data source we want to be pulling from. I think down the road, there's a chance we'll get into imaging and other things like that. Right now, we're focused on those EHR inputs. And then thirdly, did you put your money where your mouth is? Did you publish in a peer-reviewed journal about the clinical outcomes you've delivered? Was that reviewed by folks who know healthcare? And obviously a preprint would qualify for that for our perspective. But those are the three main factors, I'd say.
Now, if we were to look ahead a little bit, Adam, what do you think tech transfer professionals should be paying attention to as AI and other emerging technologies start to mature?
Great question again. So in a space that is only getting more crowded, I think the question technology transfer professionals can be asking themselves is this model, is this product a company, or is it a really good feature for a company? Two of the areas where we are really focused for the year ahead in terms of what we want to license, not exclusively, but it's a focus area, maternal health and pediatric health, right? Hugely valuable stuff that's been developed here that really matters, especially in this world where there's a huge effort to transform how rural healthcare is being done. These things can be hugely valuable, but they're often very specific, maybe a little niche. And, perhaps an algorithm that just looks at maternal preeclampsia risk, right? That could be hugely valuable. It's a very scary thing for folks who are going through it. But is that a company on its own, or is it a feature that could help a health system deliver better maternal health outcomes overall as part of a package? So what I'd say is for tech transfer offices, especially in healthcare AI, traditionally they've had these four commercialization pathways that we talked about. I think there's an opportunity here with all of the valuable IP that some of these universities and health systems are sitting on, is to challenge the model a little bit more, and also challenge if a company comes to you and says the license has to be exclusive, we're a point solution, you can only work with us. Ask yourself, in an era where this is becoming more crowded and eventually there will be consolidation, do you want to put all your eggs in one basket?
Yeah, that's something you've been saying from the very beginning of this podcast. And do you have any advice for maybe a tech transfer professional who might be evaluating an emerging technology they don't fully specialize in, the types of questions perhaps they should be asking?
Yeah, and I'm going to steal one because I just came from a fantastic panel upstairs that they're doing about how licensing healthcare innovation is a team sport. I think, on one side you have the inventor, true subject matter expert, deep clinical experience, deep technology experience. To me, those people are so impressive. And then sometimes they're so deep in their field that they can lose the forest for the trees. And so there was a woman on this panel, and I thought it was such a great idea, has a list of sort of standardized questions that when it's a subject matter area that she doesn't understand, she really pushes the inventors to speak to her in layperson's term. Great. What problem are you solving? Let's start talking in the language of business, because whatever path you're choosing, whether you're going to spin out your own company, whether you're going to license to Vega Health or somebody else in a point solution space, or you're going to try to get external investment to fund it, you've got to be able to speak the language of the business. And so I think having a set of questions that really pushes subject matter experts to explain their process, their product, in terms that we call it the parent test that your parents could understand, is always a good course of action. Yeah.
So, Adam, as a podcast comes to a close, I wanted to ask you, what's one lesson from your work at Vega Health that you think applies to anyone trying to move innovation into real world use?
I would say just the hard things are worth doing. This is a really complicated space. It is grueling that from our perspective, even when you have the right technology and you sign the contract, it's really just the start of the work. But to bring it back to your first question, opportunity is just so huge. To actually bring effective solutions that have been developed, that are working in the real world, and scale them, and scale the benefit to clinicians, to administrators, ultimately to patients. We're all consumers of healthcare at the end of the day. And if we can make this system just a little bit better for the folks who are working in it and the folks who have to experience it, it can make a huge difference. So we have a saying at Vega that this work is hard, and that's why we do it. And so that's what I would just encourage folks to think about.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for spending time with me today and explaining all that Vega Health is doing. What a fascinating company. What a very, very interesting journey you're on. So really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Adam, thank you for such a thoughtful and grounded conversation. That was a really useful look at what it takes to help new technologies move from promise to practice, whether it's in healthcare or in any other field. For our listeners, we'll include links in the show notes to learn more about Vega Health and Adam's work. If you found this conversation helpful, feel free to share it with a colleague or bring those questions back to your own portfolio or institution. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Autumn on the Air.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.